Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's AP Intergroup event on the topic of compost and digestate in the circular bioeconomy. My name is Ilias Grampas, and on behalf of the Secretariat of the European Parliament Intergroup, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's discussion, which is indeed a great important topic in the context of the European Green Deal. So our main goal is to raise awareness about the topic, but also raise ambition when it comes to healthy soil for healthy life. So with no further ado, I would like to thank hosting MEP Ms. Sarah Wiener for taking the lead when it comes to this event, but also to ECN, the European Compost Network, for kindly co-organizing this event with us today. Just maybe before we commence, some housekeeping rules for our audience, as I would like to let you know that the event is recorded. So the recording will be made available on the website of the Intergroup as of tomorrow, as soon as automatically generated by the platform. The slide of speakers will also be made public through the website of the Intergroup. And last but not least, for the questions, attendees can send us your questions through the Q&As box of the platform that should appear at the right-hand side of your platform. As we're very much looking forward to having a fruitful discussion and interactive discussion to follow, please make sure to also note within your question the speaker to whom your question is then best addressed, so that on behalf of the Secretariat, we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. So without further ado, MEP Ms. Wiener, it's with great pleasure having you on board. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And dear all, many thanks for joining us today for this event on healthy soil for healthy life, organized by the Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development. Thanks also to the Intergroup Secretariat for initiating this exchange and making this possible at all. Today's topic on healthy soil is an extremely important one because it is the key for our survival. That is because without healthy soils, we cannot feed ourselves, and right now we are on the way to destroying this precious resource. In fact, the conditions of our soils in the EU is more than worrying. Soil erosion, contamination, sealing and compaction, loss of organic matter, salinizations, landslides and desertification have negative impacts on human health, natural ecosystems and climate, as well as in our own economy. In fact, soil sealing is one of the most important environmental challenges we currently face. In Austria alone, 15 to 20 square kilometers of land are sealed every year. Meanwhile, 83% of agricultural soils in the European Union are already polluted with pesticides residues, which severely affect soil life, and 65 to 75% of soils are over-fertilized. According to the European Environment Agency, about 13% of soils in Europe are affected by moderate to severe erosion. These erosion rates will rise in the future as a result of extreme weather events, larger plot sizes due to structural change, and soil compaction due to heavy machinery use. So far, the importance of complexity of soil, its microbiome, has not really been understood at political level. For one, soil is an incredibly complex superorganism. In 1 teaspoon of soil, we can find 1 million bacteria, 120,000 fungi, and 25,000 algae. This is important because in a complex interplay, which we do not fully understand yet, this microorganism take on a key role in the conversion of nutrients and the breaking down of pollutants. Thus, they are also crucial for humus and soil formation. That means they are the very basis of agriculture and food production. Impairments of soil life directly influence our food quality. Soils filter pollutants by binding them to humus and clay particles. The filtering effect also contributes significantly to keeping our drinking water clean. In addition, healthy soils retain water, and this plays an important role in preventing crop failure due to drought and preventing floods. In short, the interplay of microorganisms which take place underground is so complex that we do not even fully understand all of it. And yet, we are steadily destroying it. Because fertile soil is actually a finite resource, and this must be understood at political level. It can take up to 500 years to form 2 centimeters of fertile soil. And because soil formation is an extremely slow process, soil must be considered as non-renewable. That is also why soil protection must be political priority in the EU. The EU soil protection strategy presented by the Commission last year was an important step closer to establish an EU-wide framework for the protection and the sustainable use of soil. A legislative proposal on soil protection is expected by 2023. As a member of the Agri Committee and someone whose central focus in politics lies on food and agriculture policy, it is naturally important that we promote agriculture practices that are also beneficial to our soils and contribute to humus build-up. For example, this would include mandatory crop rotation and incorporating legumes more into crop rotations, organic farming practices in general, such as the ban on synthetic chemical pesticides, which harm the soil microbiome, because organically farmed soils can sequester twice as much carbon as conventionally farmed soils. Intercropping and undersowing, as well as year-round greening of the soil to protect against soil erosion. And the use of compost and green manure, because this not only improves the water storage and filtering capacities of soils, but also increases the activity and numbers of microorganisms. In this context, governments should urgently develop programs aimed at stopping land degradation processes and bringing degraded lands back into production. And the application of recycled organic matter could play a very important role here, since the development of separate collection schemes for bio-waste and high-quality recycling has made available a large quantity of major safe and healthy compost and digestate. And while compost and digestate can be effective soil improvers, farmers struggle to use them properly for technical and economic reasons. In today's event, experts will report on the role bio-waste plays in the circular bioeconomy. The aim is to raise awareness of the importance of soil quality, soil health, and soil fertility at national, regional, and European level in the relation to the soil health law, the common agriculture policy, and the initiative of sustainable carbon cycles in relation to a circular economy in Europe. I very much look forward to hearing the different contributions and the discussion, and hope you find this exchange interesting and enriching for your own work. And with that, I pass the floor to the next speaker, and I apologize for my poor English, and I hope you have understood everything what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wiener. And of course, MEP Ms. Wiener is an MEP from Austria, from the Greens Group, a key member of Agri Committee, and of course the co-chair of the European Parliament Intergroup Working Group on Sustainable Agriculture, Food Systems and apiculture. So thank you very much for delivering these intro remarks today. I think you've set the scene with regards to today's discussion, so very much to the point. So underlining, of course, the key importance, but the timely nature of this topic. So thank you very much for your intro remarks. Our next speaker is Ms. Christel Vandenbroek, who is the chair of ECN, the European Compost Network, and via her intro remarks, she will be driving us all throughout the vision from bio-waste to high-quality recycled organic products. So, Christel, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you first for organizing this event together with ECN. We celebrate the 20th anniversary of ECN. And in these 20 years, we worked hard to achieve a legal framework in Europe that supports separate collection, biological treatment of organic residues, and production and use of quality assured compost and digestate products. Because from the beginning, we believed in the biological cycle, in the circular economy of bio-waste, and we believe that biowaste is a resource. And I think we can say that we now have the legal framework in Europe that supports the biological cycle. By the end of 2023, EU member states are obliged to collect biowaste. And from July this year, compost and digestate can be placed as a CE-marked fertilizing products on the European market. But there is still a long way to go. The ECN data report verifies that 40 million tons of municipal biowaste is separately collected and processed into compost and digestate. This is already 17% of the municipal solid waste. But to reach the overall recycling rate of 65% of the municipal solid waste by 2035, we know that more biowaste has to be collected, because biowaste is more or less 50% of our municipal solid waste. So biowaste will play an important role to achieve these recycling targets. The compost and digestate from biowaste provide locally produced organic matter and nitrogen. So with our SOS Soil initiative, so Save Organics in Soil, that is launched in 2019 by our Vice Chair Massimo, we raised awareness for soil health. And we are happy that the Commission has embraced this in the soil health emission. Due to high energy prices, more interest in sustainability from industry, we see interest in compost and digestate is growing for the use in potting soil to replace, for instance, peat, or for the use in organic fertilizers to replace mineral fertilizers. But if you want to build a market, a sustainable and lasting market, then you have to make sure that the quality of the compost and digestate has a high standard. And the ECN QS quality assurance scheme can be used as a benchmark to achieve this all over Europe. The biological cycle, with separate collection of biowaste, the treatment of biowaste, and the use of compost and digestate, also contributes in a positive way to climate and biodiversity by making soil healthy, fertile, and by, for instance, the sequestration of carbon. I think it is clear that there is for ECN still an important role to play in the future management of Europe's biowaste. And please enjoy today and learn more about this from the next speakers. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vandenbroek, for delivering these intro remarks as well. So seamlessly, I would like to transition to our next speaker, who is Dr. Jane Gilbert, and being the chair of the International Solid Waste Association Working Group on Biological Treatment of Waste, but also former ECN chair. Dr. Gilbert is an organic resources expert with a particular focus on composting and anaerobic digestion sectors. And so we'll be presenting us today more about compost and digestate in the circular bioeconomy, specifically looking at sustainable carbon cycles and healthy soils. So with no further ado, Dr. Gilbert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elias, and good afternoon, everybody. And to the people of Europe. And I'm talking on behalf of ECN here, the European Compost Network. Next slide, please. ECN is the leading European membership organisation promoting sustainable recycling practices of organic resources through both composting and anaerobic digestion. And both of these techniques have been around for a very long time, and they're both based on natural processes. ECN has 66 members from across 29 European countries, so that includes within the EU and also a few countries in Europe that aren't part of the Union at the moment. It represents over 40 million tonnes per annum of treatment capacity and over 4,500 treatment plants, which are permitted composting and anaerobic digestion plants. Next slide, please. ECN's mission and vision is to live well within the resources of our planet whilst respecting the organic cycle, and the mission is leading the organics recycling industry through focus on separate collection of biowaste, and that's really important quality assurance for compost and digestate in order to keep our soils healthy. ECN is very much a collaborating organisation, and it has circularity and sustainability at its heart, and also collaboration as well between its members and with other organisations. Next slide, please. What I'm going to try to do in sort of the next 10 minutes or so, which is a bit of a tall order, is try to show you the way in which bio-waste recycling can connect with the sustainable and circular bioeconomy for Europe. And as we can see from the infographic on the right-hand side, the different interfaces that the bioeconomy has with people, the planet, prosperity, peace and partnership. And bioresources cut across this, across a number of different thematic streams and strategies within Europe, including the European Green Deal aimed at reducing carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, the bioeconomy strategy, the biodiversity strategy, and in particular, finding replacements for peat and horticultural growing media, from the farm to fork strategy and sustainable growing of our foods, the soil strategy, of course, the Waste Framework Directive and diverting bio-wastes and that valuable resource away from disposal through the collection and recycling targets. So bio-waste impacts all of these. I'm going to just try in a few slides to actually show this. Next slide, please. What I'm going to do is present some of the top level findings from ECN's recent survey, which was launched today, both in paper copy, and I have a copy here, and also in electronic copy, and that should be available now on the ECN website, and the link is there at the end of this talk. Within the survey, we've included information on the types and the amounts of bio-waste that are currently recycled, information on the number of permitted composting and anaerobic digestion facilities, information about employment, and we've extrapolated some of that information to say, well, what does that actually mean in practice? Something about markets, and in particular looking at the agricultural market, which is a major part of this talk about sustainability, farm to fork strategy, etc. And then some calculations about soil improvement and the value of compost. Next slide, please. So first of all, compost and digestate for people and the people of Europe. We've calculated that overall within the EU 27 and within Switzerland, Norway and the UK, there's in the region of 5,800 permitted composting and anaerobic digestion facilities, of which around about 2/3 are composting and 1/3 are AD. Within the EU, that total number is about 4,700. So there's a significant amount of treatment already going on at the moment. Looking at the number of full-time equivalents, FTE means full-time equivalent employees. And looking at that, we have in the region of about 23,000 full-time equivalents employees across Europe. So that is the EU 27 plus Switzerland, Norway and the UK, of which most of them are on composting sites, but still a very significant number are on anaerobic digestion sites. And AD processes tend to be more sophisticated, so they have fewer number of people per site and per ton of material going through than composting. But approximately, we have about 4.7 FTEs per facility at a composting facility and about 4.9 at anaerobic digestion facilities. So that gives us a tool to look at projected increases and what that might mean in terms of the number of people employed. Next slide, please. So compost and digestate for the planet. This is the easy one to look at. We know that there's around about 60 million tonnes of bio-waste being composted and digested within the EU 27, and in total about 71 million tonnes per annum of bio-waste recycled across Europe. So round about 60% is going through composting facilities and about 40% going through anaerobic digestion facilities. And we know across Europe, based on the 60 million tonnes, based on the amount of compost being produced, we've got about 21 million tonnes of compost being produced across Europe. And if we look at that, and if we make an assumption that we will apply 10 tonnes of fresh compost per hectare onto agricultural land, and I've only taken the agricultural portion at the moment that is being of the compost that is being sold to agriculture, so this isn't the total amount. We know that this can be put on to about 2% of arable land within Europe. And if we look at the fraction of moderately to severely eroded land, it can go on to 16%. So by directing that compost, and I realise there's issues about moving it around and transport, but we have the potential to put compost onto 16% of the total of the moderate and severely eroded soils. So that's a really, really big, powerful message to take back at the effects the compost can have. And if we look at the amount of carbon that we can effectively lock up into soils as long-term stable carbon, a stable organic carbon, this is equivalent to round about 1.2 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents that could be sequestered every year just on agricultural soil. So all I've done here is taken the agricultural percentage and not the total amount. And just to try to contextualise that, that's equivalent to around about 19 million urban tree seedlings being grown for a period of 10 years. So that's an awful lot of carbon that we can effectively lock up in our soils in long-term carbon year on year. Next slide, please. Thirdly, compost and digestate for prosperity. And I think this is one of the areas that as compost practitioners, as policy people, we don't tend to we don't tend to highlight this as well as we ought to. But just looking at fertilizer value in terms of the nitrogen, the phosphorus and the potassium in fertilizers, there's been a massive increase in recent months in the price of inorganic fertilizers. And when we look at the total amount that's in the compost, it averages out based on March 22 figures at around about 63 euros per tonne of compost. And collectively across Europe, this is coming in at about 860 million euros a year. So this is a very significant amount of fertilizer based on March figures for inorganic alternatives. In terms of employment and looking at contribution to gross domestic product per employee, we can look and say that somewhere between 1 and 2 billion euros of GDP contribution comes from employment, from these full-time equivalents working across the sector every year. If we look at the carbon dioxide that we're going to sequester into soils and using the average trading value for carbon dioxide equivalents through the ETS scheme, the European Trading Scheme for carbon dioxide, this is in the region of about 90 million euros a year. And then finally, we have the compost market itself, which at the moment is really been very undersold, only 200 million a year. So if we look just between the bottom figure and the top there, we're only about a quarter selling compost, only about a quarter of what its potential fertilizer value is at the moment as well. So significant potential there to increase that value, to increase prosperity across Europe. Next slide, please. So really, to sum this up, I've summarised some of the potential. I've summarised where we are at the moment. But as Crystal said in her introduction, composting and anaerobically digesting biowaste at the moment is contributing about 17% recycling out of the total municipal solid waste of Europe. But if we are to reach 65% recycling and preparation for reuse by 2035, we feel we need to double that, which will result in an extra 46 million tonnes per annum of municipal biowaste needing to be recycled through composting and digestate. And if we look at that and extrapolate what that's going to mean for people, that will be increasing from about 18 to 31,000 full-time equivalents. We will be producing about 46 million tonnes per annum of compost. And we will increase the prosperity such that the employment itself from all of these people will be equivalent to about 76 euros per tonne of bio-waste recycled to the gross domestic product of Europe collectively. So these are really powerful messages, and this is really, really strengthening what the bio-waste sector is doing. Next slide, please. So this section is about soil, so I couldn't go without saying too much about soil. We know soils can be improved through the regular application of quality compost. Farmers have known that for millennia, but it's something that modern agricultural practices have largely forgotten, and it's time that we reconnected that circle. So the waste from our society are then going back onto the soils by which we are producing our foods. And it's going, this compost and the organic matter is being converted into what we call humus, and that can stay in soil for many years. And just a very, very roughly, if we're looking at 1 tonne of compost being produced on a fresh mass basis, we can sequester about 30 kilograms of soil organic carbon in the soil, which will be equivalent to 110 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents. So around about 11% of the mass will be going into carbon dioxide equivalents. So that's, once again, that's coming in from a climate point perspective. Next slide, please. Looking at sustainable agriculture, and I know this is going to come up later, we know that the organic matter in our soils has decreased. A study published the other year looking at the annual cost to Europe in just through organic matter losses and soil erosion. And it's in the millions and millions of euros every year just through losing productivity. And with soil and food security being such an issue at the moment, this is something that desperately needs to be addressed. So by putting compost on soils, we can improve its productivity, we can manage the water cycle better because soils with more organic matter in are better able to hold water and moisture, and it will store carbon and, importantly as well, plant nutrients. Next slide, please. So there's a huge amount of data that I've just presented here, and there's more in this report, but if there's going to be one take-home message for this is, at the moment, we're producing in the region of about 21 million tonnes per annum of compost. And that is enough to put onto all of the arable land in Belgium at a rate of about 25 tonnes per hectare every year. So at the moment, the compost is enough for all of Belgium's arable land, the land on which we are growing our crops for us humans to eat. But if we double that, we have the potential to put up enough compost at 25 tonnes per hectare on 2 Belgiums. So that's in itself, that's a very powerful message, and one that hopefully you'll take away with you today just from listening to this. Next slide, please. So really to finalise, what I've tried to do here is to show you how some of the links between bio-waste and the sustainable and circular bioeconomy in Europe can impact on the European Green Deal, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the bioeconomy, the biodiversity strategy, farm to fork, and not least diverting bio-waste from final disposal in landfill or waste to energy plants. So there's a lot of interlinking here, a lot of cross-cutting themes, and sometimes because of its cross-cutting nature, this tends to get lost within European policy making. So I would like the policymakers here to really understand that bio-waste, and through the manufacture of quality compost and quality digestate, is a growing and a significant resource for Europe. ECN does have a number of position papers. Sorry, next slide, please. A number of position papers and guidance on the website, talking about soil fertility, carbon farming, carbon farming initiatives, and also separate biowaste collections as well, which are very important to produce quality compost. So next slide, please, final slide. So if you do want to go through any of that, the ECN's website is listed there on the right-hand side. And I would also like to encourage you to go to the Save Organics in Soil website as well, which is a joint initiative between ECN and the Italian Composting Association, CEEC. And if you haven't signed it already, please do sign up to this, because this is one of our flagship initiatives at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gilbert, for guiding us through the mission and the vision of ECN, but also for providing us with a key link and benefits when it comes to the 5 Ps, people, planet, partnerships, peace, but also prosperity. As I'm sure that these 3 interventions that came before have stimulated a great discussion to follow. Maybe just before that, a little reminder for our audience, as I noticed that we have a little less than 150 participants following the event live. So this is just a reminder to not be shy, and you can send us all your questions for speakers. You can also do that via the Q&As box of the platform. So that should appear at the right-hand side of your screen. If not visible, it might be possible that you need to click on the 3 dots that appear at the bottom right part of the platform for this event today. On this note, I'm very happy to introduce you to our excellent set of panelists to follow. Some of these have also joined us physically here at the room. So we're accompanied by 6 speakers. If you're connected online, I would also like to invite you to the electronic stage. So please feel free to open your cameras. And specifically, we have with us today Ms. Sylvia Eil, who is the Deputy Head of B3 Unit from Waste to Resources at DG Environment. Thank you for joining us. We also have Mr. Enzo Favoino, who is the chair of the Scientific Committee of Zero Waste Europe, and inter alia, the co-founder of ECN. And Enzo, it's with great pleasure having you with us today. Mr. Alberto Confalonieri is also an expert on biowaste recycling and the chair of the task group on soil organic matter at the ECN, European Compost Network. So a warm welcome also to you, but of course to Mr. Hen Voice as well, market development consultant at Novamont, which is the world's leading company in the sector of bioplastics and biochemicals. And our 2 more speakers for this panel discussion are Ms. Sabine Hot, who is an agronomist and research director at INRE, which stands for the French National Research Institute dedicated to agricultural science. I'm very happy to have you as well on board. And last but not least, I'm happy to introduce you as well to Mr. Arnaud Schwarz, who is president of France Nature Environnement, the biggest French environmental umbrella organization, which Mr. Schwarz represents in the European Economic and Social Committee, where he was also the rapporteur for the opinion of the EU soil strategy for 2030. So extremely well suited for this panel discussion as well today. It's with great pleasure having all speakers connected electronically or physically in the room. So without further ado, I'd just like to turn to Ms. Eil from the European Commission. And I think that we've all been very much looking forward to your intervention today. I think it would be great to hear from you, starting this discussion, on the key priorities of the European Commission when it comes to ensuring effective collection schemes for biowaste, but also high quality recycling inside the EU. So what's your take on this?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in your event. So I also thank for the organizing such very good speakers, in particular the intervention of Dr. Gilbert. I think it's very important information that she shared with us today, and also quite strongly emphasizes the need for concerted action in better and more sustainable management of the resources that are contained in biowaste that we generate in the EU. So in relation to, in terms of the perspective from the Commission, I think we're currently in a very important transitional period in the EU, where looking at the waste policy aspects, we have defined very ambitious EU legislation in the past couple of years. So there is a lot of effort taking place now in the member states and with the stakeholders in actually implementing those new rules. So here I'm talking about first and foremost the revision of 2018 of the Waste Framework Directive, but also on the landfill directive, and also the implementation of the fertilizing products regulation, which also created recognized the value of bio-waste in the fertilizing products and harmonizing the market for that for the marketing of those products. So first and foremost, what is our priority in the waste policy? That is prevention of waste. About 60% of bio-waste is food waste. So the biggest focus we have is on food waste, in particular because of, well, we are talking about a very precarious situation in Europe and abroad. So with the war that is happening on our doorsteps, this puts another look at the food security policies. So any food that is being wasted, and the current data indicates that about 20% of all food produced is wasted. So it's, the more data we have, the more it reinforces the need for action on reduce food waste and bio waste. So that this is also, of course, many of you know, if not everybody, that there are very specific United Nations Sustainable Development Goal objectives in relation to food waste reduction, and that in the EU, in the Commission, we take it extremely seriously. So as a result, we are currently carrying out an impact assessment to try to assess the feasibility of setting food waste reduction targets. And so this is something that we're currently having ongoing stakeholder consultations with the objective of potentially proposing legally binding measures for next year. Now, the second priority is to ensure that waste that is generated is managed in a sustainable way. So this has been very eloquently explained by Dr. Gilbert. So there is a need to implement in an ambitious way the separate collection obligation that has now been established in the EU legislation. So that deadline to introduce that is already for end of next year. So the national schemes and processes should be well underway, and in most countries this already takes place. We just need an extra effort in order to scale it up and ensure that the purity of collected waste is at a level that actually ensures that the take-up of those materials for use on soils. So with in a way that it does not pollute the soil. So the priority is to make sure that that bio-waste is taken out of the residual waste fraction, does not end up in landfills, does not end up in MBT plants, and really is directed towards proper recycling processes, resulting in good quality material as a fertilizer. Now, this, so we have national waste management plans that are in the process of being revised nationally. And according to the new legislation, we are looking for specific measures in those waste management plans to assess what is the need for the new separate collection systems, and what would be the financing of such separate collection systems. So that's very important. So to understand how the economics of this systems of collection and recycling will work, and how that would be then, how it would be ensured that this material is actually taken up. If it's not taken up, then it still remains waste. So there's a loss of an effort. And we're also looking forward to seeing what kind of, what is the planning of setting up the recycling capacity in the EU and in the different regions. Now, it was already mentioned in the presentation before that bio-waste in some countries makes up even up to 50% of municipal waste. And so therefore a proper management of this fraction is really the key to ensure that member states and EU collectively ensures that we achieve our own objectives on recycling of municipal waste. So we have set very ambitious target of 65% by 2030. And this target cannot be achieved without very strict and broad measures on bio-waste collection. So that is very clear, and we therefore put a lot of attention on the efforts the member states would put in setting up the separate collection systems. Now, we also have rules in place, to really strengthen this aspect of the recycling targets, because there is specific calculation rules that basically prevent member states from reporting waste as recycled if it has not been separately collected. So that is an additional sort of instrument to push in the direction of high levels of collection of separately collected waste. And what is also extremely important is the need to engage with the stakeholders that would be the recipients of this secondary raw material. So setting the right market conditions that there is a take-up of this material. So indeed, I think broadly in the EU, it's recognized that we have an issue in relation to soil quality, and there's soil degradation, but that is not necessarily the case across all of the EU. So there are different market situation in terms of the potential take-up of bio-waste. And so the particular attention needs to be made by the competent authorities in the member states, the regional authorities, to ensure that they're, how the engagement with the stakeholders and what are the necessary elements in terms of building the trust in those stakeholders for using this material on their land. And so there are a number of great practices that are available. I can give particular attention to the ECN network and all their work on providing guidance and examples of best practice. So there is no one size fits all, but there's lots of good practices available. So no one needs to reinvent the wheel. I think that is the best case scenario that we can find ourselves. And so at the Commission level, what we're doing is we are making available funding through a number of funding programs, mostly in terms of building the capacities on recycling and separate collection, as well as on research and development. We also have programs in place that allow member states to share practices with each other, especially in the context of the TAIEX program, where regions or local municipalities of similar sort of local conditions can meet up and exchange best practices and to learn from each other. And also as a Commission, we are putting a lot of emphasis in our dialogues with the member states and our reports to point out these best practices and the importance of the sustainable management. But I don't think that we have to do much of preaching, because that is very clear already for these for the authorities. But what I think is the key issue is to have proper stakeholder engagement when setting up these systems, lots of awareness raising with the citizens to make clear to them what are the rules, what is the benefit, why they're asked to separately collect bio-waste, and what is really the benefit to the overall environment and society when this material is not when it's directed in the right way. So those were, I think, looking from the Commission's perspective, these are the key elements that we're looking at. As I said, it's a transitional period. So now we're looking to see in the following year and a half how member states actually put in place these new legislations. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Misael, for communicating, for sharing with us the key vision and the great work on behalf of the European Commission. I just have noted that due to an overlapping commitment, you need to leave at 4 o'clock sharp. Is this correct? All right. So perhaps maybe I just take the opportunity to ask you a follow-up question before turning to other panelists. As I wanted to ask you very quickly, maybe, which are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the main challenges and opportunities when it comes to bringing more attention to these topics? For example, soil quality, soil health, and soil fertility when it comes to soil health law, CAP, or the initiative on sustainable carbon cycles.
Yes, I'm really sorry I was not able to to stay with you for the extended period. So, but and thanks a lot also for this question. So I think that it's remarkable that the EU soil strategy is really the key pillar of the European Green Deal. And that it is recognized really as making an essential contribution to achieving our objectives identified in the Green Deal. So in terms of biodegradability loss, delivering the zero pollution agenda for the EU, and also most importantly the objectives in relation to climate change. So therefore the soil strategy really sets an ambitious agenda for the years to come. So with the short-term actions and long-term actions and vision for the EU. And so indeed, I think it was already pointed out in the introductory speeches that it is a threat to the human life when the soils are degraded, and the threat that it provides to the food security. Now we have in the strategy has envisaged as one of the key deliverables also legislative measures on soil health. And one of the biggest, a central element of that legislation will be to try to define what is a healthy soil. So it will be looking, so that definition will be looking at such terms as what are the most relevant soil health parameters, and what are maybe the related ranges of values for those parameters. And the objective is to provide a very clear direction to the member states on where their action is needed, with the idea to reach healthy soils across the EU by 2050. The soil health. So this the work on the definition and the parameters that are linked to that is really the key concept, because that's how you link it to in the clearest way to the conditions of soil and the ability for the soil to be multifunctional. So that is in relation to its capacity to provide at the same time the ecosystem services such as food and biomass production, water and nutrient cycling, carbon storage, and the basis for biodiversity. So this is, this has been clearly indicated in the soil strategy. And so when we're really trying to read the strategy word by word and really try to reflect that in legislation where that will be feasible. So we're currently carrying out an impact assessment to understand what is feasible. And there is quite a number of stakeholder consultation happening right now with the experts, with stakeholders. I understand that the open public consultation is the next step in the process, and that should be launched in July, so next month, and will be open for 12 weeks seek the views of the wider public and stakeholders on specific measures, on problem drivers, and other views in relation to the impacts of such measures. You mentioned also, what's the action on the degraded lands. So yeah, I mean, this is to be seen to what extent this is also part of the legislation. But I mean, it's certain to say that in the soil strategy, this is specifically addressed, and therefore, as much as possible, this will be looked at also in terms of the current impact assessment process. But there are clear actions that are envisaged in the strategy to address it. So, for example, identifying contaminated sites, setting up inventory and registers for such sites, and measures in relation to remediation following a risk-based approach. So that, in a very short statement, is what I can say in relation to this aspect. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Misael, for your reply, and it's been extremely insightful and informative for us all and speakers in the room. As I see, we've all been taking notes during your intervention, and I also see that your intervention has also stimulated great interest from the audience as well, as I see many questions popping up in the platform. So thank you very much once again for joining us today. And on this note, I'd like to turn to Mr. Enzo Favoino, who in the recent years has been particularly involved in defining policies and strategies and also implementing a plethora of best practices. So my question, which comes naturally, is where do you see the main challenges to improve the separate collection when it comes to bio-waste, food waste, and green waste in Europe? I think you are muted.
And to contribute, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Elias, and thanks for the invitation. I'm always the happiest man to contribute to discussions around bio-waste because it's really pivotal in strategies for circular economy, and much as I'm much more involved now in zero waste programs as the perfect toolkit to turn the vision of circular economy into operational reality. We always acknowledge that getting organics right is always key in order to get to the highest recycling rates and the most sustainable strategies as a whole. Let me start from the certainties. All the previous speakers have brought up some thought-provoking remarks, and I totally align with their vision and remarks in this respect. They were really, really informing statements. However, let me start from the certainties. We do have Article 22. Article 22 is one of the things that makes me most proud of being European. An obligation for separate collection of the organics, that's a big achievement. Indeed, a big achievement. This is something we have long been striving for because it is a common roadmap for everyone in Europe, be it policymakers, be it decision makers, be it investors, be it waste managers, be it common citizens. So we can have the alignment of decisions, and above all, we can ensure the bankability of local initiatives and schemes. That's important. It's always important. It's one of the wanted consequences of directives, regulations, and so on and so forth. However, with that being said, I would say we still miss something because we have got an obligation, but we do not have legally binding targets, nor we do have some key performance indicators stipulated in European directives. And we can discuss it both from the quantity angle and the quality angle of the collected bio-waste. Because, for instance, from the quantity angle, once we have got an obligation for separate collection, it's quite easy to comply with, just setting out one single wheelie bin in the main square of the municipality and tell the people, go there and deliver your bio-waste. You comply with the obligation, but quite probably you will have 0.0% of the total bio-waste captured. So that would be falling incredibly short of the total ambition of Article 22. We did a couple of years ago a survey with the BIC, Bio-Based Industries Consortium, regarding the total theoretical potential of capturing bio-waste and where are we now, or actually where were we a couple of years ago relative to the total theoretical potential capture. And we found out that basically we were collecting 32% of biowaste, which is already a comparatively acceptable figure, but only 16% of food waste. You know, it's comparatively easy to collect garden waste because with garden waste, you may just tell people, okay, take it to the civic amenity sites, or I roll out a green waste collection round, but it's particularly easy. But also, you know, when we do have garden waste, we have got backyards in which we may promote home composting, which is more sustainable than curbside programs, of course, than centralized composting. So the real big challenge in the future will be to maximize the total capture of food waste. Unfortunately, most of the food waste, also in those countries in Central Europe with long-standing strategies for separate collection of biowaste, there's a large part of food waste that may still be found in residual waste. And that's a net leakage of resources from circular management. We cannot afford it. We know in circular economy, we want to keep resources in the loop in their highest status for as long as possible. This means we have to collect separately bio-waste as per Article 22 in order to send it for composting and anaerobic digestion. Thanks God, there is good practice there everywhere across Europe, and I would say above all in Southern Europe, such situations as the Basque Country, Catalonia, also Wales in the United Kingdom is doing particularly well. But if you consider, because, you know, one of the main objections is, you know, curbside programs for organics are suitable for small rural villages, but what about a large metropolitan area? We do have such examples. In the city of Milan, Milan is totaling 1.4 million people and also 800,000 daily commuting workers, and they are currently capturing 87% of the total organics generated by the city. So it may be done. Of course, the system has to be designed and run properly, but good practice is there, so we may be confident. Now, the second and last point is quality, about quality. We do not have key performance indicators on quality, I mean in directives. We compostaholics have long been working with the comparisons of data from across Europe, different types of systems. And we are currently carrying out a survey on behalf of the European Circular Economy, Bioeconomy Policy Initiative on what is the damage, the cost, and the environmental impact of having a poor quality of collected biowaste. So just applying to the total theoretical potential of collected biowaste at full deployment of the strategies for separate collection of biowaste, just considering the range values for the best quality we may have and the worst quality we may have, because we do have range values and they very much depend on the type of the scheme. Some schemes are maximizing responsibility and participation in separate collection, others simply don't. However, applying the range values, we came up with figures that range from 3 to 15 million tons. Well, actually, let me consider the impurities, the total amount of impurities. The total amount of impurities would be between 1.2 million tons and 6 million tons, minimum and maximum. Of course, we have to strive to go towards the minimum one. Of course, composting sites and anaerobic digestion sites are well designed in order to get rid of the impurities, but unfortunately, we have got a small curse attached to it, the so-called dragging factor. With primary screens, with final refiners, with all the machinery to get rid of the contraries, unfortunately, we send in rejects also part of the biowaste or part of the end product. And typically, the dragging factor is in the region of 2.5 tons of lost product per each ton of impurity. So the total amount of lost compost, lost biowaste actually, would be spanning from 3 million tons to 15 million tons, which is a total value, a staggering total value at European level, ranging from 300 million euros to 1.5 billion euros. Apart from the lost resources, the leakage of resources we would have from circular management, because part of the biowaste would be sent out together with impurities. So there is so much we have to do in the near future. in order to work on maximized performances of curbside collection, curbside schemes, when it comes to both quantity and quality. This is the next big challenge, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Enzo, for your remarks. And seamlessly, I would like to transition to Mr. Alberto Confalonieri, who is with us today, as I wanted to ask you, with your key experience on the topic addressed today as a bio-waste recycling expert, I wanted to ask if you see any legal bottlenecks to integrate recycled organic fertilizers and soil improvers when it comes to agricultural management systems.
Thank you very much for the question. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks a lot for letting me be part of this interesting panel on this topic. We've heard very impressive numbers from Jane about the amount of bio-waste which is currently separately collected and recycled. And I say this for stressing the fact that this wouldn't have been possible if legal regulation wouldn't be put in place for ensuring recycling, quality recycling, and the quality of the end products. Just let me go through the good news. Several countries have implemented for many years, since decades in some cases, regulations on recycling and compost and digestate quality. ECN has put in place a fundamental quality assurance system, and several countries have been certified BCN or have implemented their own quality assurance system. One cannot forget that in a couple of weeks, the European fertilizer regulation will enter into force. I want to stress the fact that this regulation is a risk-based regulation. This means that the products that have been regulated by the fertilizer regulation have been thoroughly examined, and compost, digestate, and the soil improvers that can be produced by these bricks have been evaluated and certified. Compost is within the regulation on organic farming. So at given conditions, compost can be used in organic farming too. So these are all the good news. So I should answer to the question, no, there are no legal bottlenecks that hamper the utilization of compost and digestate into soil. But I think, and I'm happy that Ms. Hale has mentioned this aspect during her speech. What we miss is maybe the connection, the real commitment between waste management and product utilization. To close the loop, we have to create commitment. We have to put in place all is necessary to win, for example, the diffidence that among some farmers and citizens arise for being compost derived from waste. We have to overcome the loss of culture in organic matter value. So we have to put in place instruments that make farmers willing to use compost. So I would end this first part of my intervention with, if I had to launch a slogan, compost is legal, now let's make it desirable.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and that's a positive message to wrap up this intervention. I would then be turning to Mr. Henk Voice, representing a market leader company, moreover as a professional working with various stakeholders in the value chain to develop products that can deliver solutions to major environmental problems. I wanted to ask you, what would you see as the key role of bio-based products in ensuring a healthy soil?
Yes, thank you. I would build up on elaborate on what Enzo already said. It's all about increasing the collection of food waste. So any food waste going to landfill or incineration is a pity. So in a way, food waste contains a lot of water, so if it goes to incineration, we're trying to burn water. I think this is something we should not want. And then the second important thing is to reduce the leakage of products to the environment. So unfortunately, and despite all the communication and let's say the efforts to take impurities out, I think we still see impurities in the form of glass and plastics in compost, in food waste collected, and not all can be taken out. So we need to do something about that. And I think what we have seen on best practices already, I think you have 3 categories of consumer products which can help there. So the first category is products that consumers can directly use to collect the food waste at home, to make it easier for them. It could be food waste liners provided by a municipality directly, but it can also be carrier bags or fruit and vegetable bags, which are provided in supermarkets. People can use it to take their vegetables home and then reuse it or repurpose it as a tool for food waste collection. And then the second category is products contaminated with food waste. But the food waste is attached to the packaging and cannot be separated. So for example, if you take a coffee capsule, I think you cannot separate the packaging or the plastic from the spent coffee grounds. It's impossible. So you need to decide what you can do with that. And there is then a third consumer category is, let's say, products known to contaminate compost. So in various countries, research has been now done to analyze what is actually being thrown in the compost bin, in the organic waste bin. And we know the examples. Fruit and vegetable, let's say, labels on fruits and vegetables. Nobody's going to take them off, or some of them do, thanks to them. Products used in gardening. And again, the previous 2 categories, we find bags where people put in their food waste, but the bags happen to be non-biodegradable. And we find packaging that is contaminated there. So I think there is 3 categories of product which we can really do something about, and we have the best practices. And there is another category, but this is a non-consumer products. I think in agriculture, we are using a lot of products, phytosanitary products, bin mold films, lubricants, and I think we need them to grow our crops. But it's impossible, or at least very, very, very difficult to recycle them. So, and there's a high chance of them getting lost into the soil. So there we need biodegradability of products in soil. But again, these are most cases, non-consumer products.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voits. And I'm aware that we're running a little late in terms of planning today. And as it's been a very busy week for MEPs, I'd like to give a fresh plot twist in the agenda of today's event and turn to MEP Ms. Katainen for an early reaction, as I'm aware that you have to also disconnect shortly. Hello, Ms. Katainen.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, unfortunately, planes will not wait, so thanks for the flexibility. Dear participants, thank you for the invitation to talk on this event. It is of most importance in these days to gather together on the same table with these topics. Carbon farming and soil health are the key solutions in the future agriculture. Healthy soil also produces better yields, which is why these initiatives are important for farmers. By making the right kind of agricultural policy, we will improve European and global food security and also solve the problem of famine, which has risen in new way with the war in Ukraine, which we see also in Europe as a food and energy crisis. It is therefore extremely important that food production remains at the heart of both goal farming and soil policy. When it comes to soil health law, we must ensure that we have fair legislation which considers the differences of member states. We must also take care of policy coherence. We have already several legislation which affect soil and environment by indirect way, such as existing nitrate directive and fertilizer regulation, but also restoration law and sustainable use of pesticides, where we have just received new proposal from Commission. Commission's strategy on soil health is trying to find an answer for a crucial issue to make the soil health better, which, as said, is a crucial issue for European food production. However, we must still deeply evaluate and ask if other possible means have been considered to achieve the goal of fertile soil than a soil health law. For example, has training and advice in the agriculture sector been considered enough, or could the issues been covered in other related regulations? Heavy, expensive and bureaucratic regulation may not produce the best outcome, so we must be careful and assess the impacts well. Carbon farming is a great possibility for European farmers, where the discussion has started already as part of the LULUCF, where Parliament gave a positive signal on it in recital 10. Parliament is also preparing an INI report on sustainable carbon cycles, where this issue will be discussed in ENVI and AGRI committees. My main takeaways on the discussions are that the European carbon farming model should be market-based, globally compatible, and make it viable for farmers and forest owners to sequestrate carbon. The financial incentives for carbon farming should come from public and private sources instead of the common agricultural policy funds. It should reward land managers in agriculture and forestry for their sustainable management practices or the actual amount of carbon sequestrated, which has been measured reliable. This also benefits the soil health when the underground carbon storage grows. The European carbon farming model should cover relevant bio-based products and innovative products, especially those made from byproducts and residues. There is a scientifically proven, genuine and verifiable carbon sequestration effect, which we must fully utilize. We've had enough dreams for better future, but what we need right now is a concrete, effective actions. Carbon removal certificates need to be globally accountable and avoidable accountings. This all is not an easy task for European Commission, but I think it is very important now to have deep discussion in this. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katainen, for your remarks, and I'm extremely honored by your presence here today, not only as a key member of the European Parliament from Finland for the Renew Europe group, but also for delivering this message as Vice Chair of the European Parliament Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development. So thank you very much once again for joining this discussion today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Moving on to the panel discussion, then I would like to turn to Ms. Sabine Ott. As I wanted to ask you, what are the effects of compost and digestates on soil health? I think everyone knows about the excellent research conducted at INRE, so perhaps some reflections on this point?
Thank you for inviting me to this discussion, very interesting discussion. Maybe I can make some comments about compost and digestate and their very important role on soil health. And I think many things have been mentioned by Dr. Gilbert previously. The key issue, I think, is the impact of compost application on soil organic matter content, because the soil organic matter content in soil is really the driver of soil fertility and soil health. and it also has a key issue on the environmental role of soil and mitigation of climate change in relation with carbon storage in soil. So if you are able to predict the carbon storage in soil using compost and digestate, you can manage soil health, and you can manage how compost use and digestate use can contribute to climate change attenuation mitigation. That's why it's very important to know the organic matter characteristics of the compost, and we know that there are some indicators to be able to predict, as Dr. Gilbert mentioned, when applying 10 tons of compost every 3 years, you may reach an increase of soil organic matter that are higher than the 4 per mil initiative. Maybe we didn't mention this 4 per mil initiative yet, but you know that if the soil organic carbon content increase of more than 4 per mil each year, you contribute to the attenuation of the excess greenhouse gas emission that related to anthropogenic activities. So it's very important to have a higher increase of soil organic matter higher than 4 per mil. So with such rate of application of compost of 10 tons every 3 years per hectare, you can increase soil organic matter by to a rate that are higher than the 4 per mil initiative. So it's really contribute to the climate change mitigation. And if we want to compare compost and digestate, compost, the very big difference is that digestate are contain much more water and less organic matter. So you will need more application to reach the same amount of increased carbon in soil than with compost. And digestate will have another very interesting effect, is to be able to substitute the mineral fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer. So with the compost, you increase organic matter, you substitute the phosphorus, the potassium, and with digestate, you substitute your mineral nitrogen fertilizer, and with a slower rate, you can also increase soil organic matter. And in relation with soil organic matter increase, you have an increase of soil biological activity, of physical properties in soil, and etc. So you increase the soil health. But of course, you need to control the quality of the product that you are using and recycling on soil, and all the comments that have been made on contaminants and mostly on microplastic are very important, because this is really a big concern, the input of microplastic with either the compost or the digestate. So you need to be sure that this input is as low as possible. And there is also, at least in France, a concern about the application of digestate on biological activity in soil. We know that compost enhances biological activity in soil, but there are very big discussion right now in France about the effect of digestate on this biological activity. So there is a review that has been done by scientists from INRAE, and I can provide you the reference if you want to put it on your website. And it's mentioned that digestate compared to mineral fertilizer has better efficiency at increasing soil biological activity. But compared to other organic amendments, such as compost, it's a little less efficient than compost at increasing biological activity. So maybe compost are better for biological activity. And well, I think that's the main ideas that I wanted to mention this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Watt, for your remarks. I see that MEP Ms. Manuela Ripa is also connected. Good afternoon, Ms. Ripa. Just maybe before giving you the floor, I'd like to turn to Mr. Arno Schwarz, who, being a rapporteur for the NAT opinion on the EU soil strategy for 2030, I wanted to reach out and ask you, where do you see the key challenges for achieving that all EU soil ecosystems are in healthy conditions by 2050?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for having me with you and all these interesting speakers we've heard this afternoon. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Economic and Social Committee, and its opinion points, like always when you have a strategy to implement, to the fact we need people and means to do it. So if you want to achieve this goal by 2050, you really need that amount of human power and money. And secondly, we also wrote that the clear definition is needed. What a healthy soil is, which indicators we will use, and threshold values on scientifically sound basis. This is really very important. We also need, because 2050 is far away, clear targets for 2030. Based on this definition, we have to make more precise and guaranteeing an adequate level of environmental protection and climate action. And there's a loophole in the strategy in our eyes because we really also need action for already happening big droughts, heavy rains, and so on. So we need actions to adapt, to protect soils already, and this needs to be amended to be added to the strategy we believe. We also wrote, if we want to achieve this challenge, we have to respect the principle of subsidiarity. Given the heterogeneity of soils, the variety of uses and demands for use, the different geological, climatic, and landscape conditions, as well as the differentiated hazards and national rules already in place. This means we will all have same goals, but we have really to adapt and to go to the parcel level. We also need a tool to monitor what's happening on each parcel. And healthy soil on one kind of environment will not be a healthy soil in another part of regarding biodiversity issues, climate issues, agronomy, and so on. It's very highly complex subject, of course. That's why we also need, that has already been said, to prioritize some measures on education, advice, knowledge transfer, and incentives for soil protection over additional legal obligations. So why not more legal framework, but please do not forget education for all kind of stakeholders is very needed to make things wanted and implemented. Not only people and money is needed. And of course, when you are thinking of small farmer, you also have to keep in mind to lower the burden to a reasonable level to ensure affordability of implementation and monitoring of what's happening on the ground. I would like to end and to add another point we wrote in our opinion to this. It's regarding, of course, artificialization of the soil. So land use and our target for 2050 is very important as well. As our target for zero pollution, because also chemical threat for soils is very important to take into account.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schwartz. And I think there is a very strong and extremely important message trying to sum up your interventions. You've been calling for the need for science-based solution, clear targets for the period also prior to 2050 as well, when it comes to delivery. Of course, equally important to ensure that environmental protection and climate action are at the core of our efforts, in full respect of the subsidiarity principle, and also the need to ensure affordability monitoring, but also the key role of artificialization of the soil. So thank you very much for your remarks. And then, with no further ado, I'd like to turn to MEP Ms. Manuela Ripa, who is also with us today, perhaps for some early reactions. Ms. Ripa is, of course, a member of the European Parliament for Germany for the Greens Party. So, Ms. Ripa, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm exactly member of the Ecologic Democratic Party in Germany and part of the Greens EVA group in the European Parliament. Thank you for having me here today. And I already have to say I'm very sorry that I'm late and that I just can rush in and then rush out because at past I have another conference I have to attend. It's really a horrible day, but for me it was very, very important today to be here with you because we are talking about a very important topic, and this is soil protection and circular bioeconomy. And well, I don't say anything new that today's soils in Europe are indeed facing various threats. And if we are serious about the European Green Deal, there is no way around our soil. Healthy soils are the requirement for achieving the EU's sustainability goals. And again, needless to say here, but it is so important, I want to highlight it, that healthy soils are, amongst others, the basis for the functioning of our ecosystems, our food, a stable climate, and healthy soils are, of course, an important CO2 reservoir. We have the challenge that soil is a limited and finite resource. And once the soil is severely damaged or destroyed, generations to come up will not witness its restoration. This is very important to notice, but what is the situation in the EU? Well, 70% of our soils are in the EU are in a poor condition. And until now, and certainly you talked about it, there is not a binding EU-wide regulation to protect our soils. There are already European regulations to protect water and air, but still not a common legislative act on soil protection. So the question that comes up, isn't healthy soil just as important for our survival as water and air? I strongly believe that Europeans deserve a strong soil protection law as soon as possible. We have learned from previous experiences that the common legal framework is the best and most efficient approach to regulate the use of valuable resources in all member states in a sustainable manner. And as a shadow rapporteur on the resolution on soil protection, I was constantly calling on the Commission, together with other shadow rapporteurs, to prioritize the importance of soil and to come up with a legislative proposal. And I have to say, not all shadow rapporteurs were in favor of this, because we still face in the Parliament that there are a lot of MEPs who do not want to have an EU-wide soil protection legislation. So it was really a hard procedure and a hard fight within the groups of the Parliament to get this legislative asking for this legislative procedure in the resolution, and very happy that in the end we won and we voted in plenary for a call for a legislation for the protection of soil. It was not easy, it was a big fight. And I'm happy that afterwards the Commission finally announced that they will indeed come up with a legislation on soil. And I support the approach of binding and measurable targets for soil protection. This must go hand in hand with an ambitious timetable and compulsory measures to preserve soil functions, avoid soil damage, and restore degraded soil. Of course, we also need climate and soil-adapted agricultural production. Moreover, and this is also a very important fact for me, and I highlighted it in the resolution, that member states should be obliged, when they seal soil, to give preferences to brownfield rather than using greenfield in order to prevent soil sealing. We have to end land degradation by 2030 and net land take by 2050 at the latest. We have to do it much earlier. And in order to achieve this goal, we need an EU-wide legally binding framework and a uniform system in the EU to monitor soil quality, to mark fallow land and vacancies, and to identify risk areas. This is how we can transfer to more sustainable land use. And bioeconomy, the topic of today, has an important role to play in order to achieve this goal. Stronger development of the bioeconomy could significantly help the EU accelerate the progress towards a circular and low-carbon economy. This could help us to modernize and strengthen the EU industrial base, creating new value chains and greener, more cost-effective industrial processes, while protecting our biodiversity and the environment, because we should never forget we have a lot of climate protection measures, but we also need biodiversity protection measures. In the resolution on soil, we highlighted the loss of fertile land to urban developments reduces the potential to produce bio-based materials and fuels, and we should support a low-carbon bioeconomy we have a coherent and adequate EU soil protection policy. We need a coherent and adequate soil protection policy because this is a prerequisite to achieve the Paris Agreement and the European Green Deal, and in particular, amongst others, also to fulfill the bioeconomy strategy and other main environmental and social challenges. Let me add another aspect. Since soil protection concerns everyone, we need an effective and inclusive public participation and consultation when it comes to the consumption of soils. Europeans should no longer be left out when it comes to land use. And to conclude, the consequences of devastating soils are a cross-border issue and therefore require a cross-border solution. It is therefore essential that we tackle soil protection at a European level and not leave this important problem to the member states to deal with, because this was inefficient. So thank you very much for your attention and for having me here today to speak.
Thank you very much, MEP Ms. Riepijns. All throughout this discussion, I think we've been connecting all the puzzle pieces throughout the interventions of various speakers, and indeed with the ambitions of previous interventions. We've been able to cover various angles, but you have really just taken the discussion to a whole new ground, if I may add, well, no pun intended. But it's been of significant importance having you with us today and hearing more from you about your dedication, your ambition, as well as the delivery of such a strong political commitment. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. And on this note, I'd have just a follow-up question for speakers. So I'd like to turn to Mr. Enzo Favoino. As I wanted to ask you, as we're approaching the end of this event in 30 minutes time, I'd like to come back saying, if perhaps maybe we could reflect, we could zoom out and see what would be your take on how can the circular bioeconomy contribute to healthy soils?
That's a great question and very far-reaching, I would say. Well, basically, of course, we already discussed the general goal of circular economy, which is retaining resources in the loop for as long as possible in their highest and best status. This also includes preventing food wastage, of course, because we should keep a cascading approach. We have to feed the humans as long as possible, and then feed the animals, and then feed the soils. But never ever we should be feeding the landfills and the incinerators. Also, let me remind myself and all the audience, we do have already consistent legislation which was trying to drive proper management of organic waste, which was already stipulated in the Landfill Directive back in 1999, because we already had a target for diverting 65% of biodegradable municipal waste. It's not only organics, also paper, for instance, or natural textiles, but mostly this affects organics. And why so? Because organics are at the intersection of various policies for sustainability, not only waste policy, but also climate policy. Methane from landfills is 20% of the total anthropogenic methane, as it was remarked by the UNEP Methane Initiative lately. Now we are discussing the methane strategy over here in Europe, and of course the obligation own separate collection of the organics, if properly fulfilled, would give a very big contribution to that. But also the storage of carbon, probably this was not exposed sufficiently, even though it was somehow related to most of the remarks done by all the panel speakers. But the soils are the second largest pool of carbon in the planet after the oceans. And so while we are striving in order to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere in the shape of carbon dioxide producing climate change, we can store more carbon in soils in the form of organic matter to produce fertility. So it would be a win-win situation in this respect. Also, the intersection between the common agricultural policy and the climate policy now is drawing attention to it quite much. But if you consider the butterfly diagram of circular economy, just to come to your question, we have got the two wings, and one whole wing is dedicated to biological materials. So we do have many things we may do with organics once we do have organic waste. And of course, we may consider biorefineries, we may consider composting, we may consider anaerobic digestion. Let me remark, with biorefineries, we may produce higher added value. Still, much of the carbon will be retained in the biomass, which is left behind after extracting high-value materials. And so, to some extent, composting and aerobic digestion will always play a role in this respect.
Thank you very much, Enzo, for your reply. And turning to Alberto, well, we have heard a lot today about the need for action and the key added value of that. So in order to render this possible, do you think that specific incentives are needed so that farmers will adapt carbon farming practices in their soil management approach?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, of course. But before that, let me recall what we've said this afternoon about the importance of raising awareness, importance of exchanging experiences. And in this sense, we have great expectations about the upcoming regulation on soil health, because we think that in that recipient, many messages can be put that allow local governments put in place actions under a common view and under a common set of instruments. Coming to the incentives, yes, we need incentives because, as we have known, farmers have lost the culture of conserving and enriching organic matter in soils, and we cannot raise this awareness just telling them, okay, next year put some compost in your field, because they need to be carried over a path of awareness raise, of persuasion, and on the long term they will understand. And if in this path they will have applied organic matter with including with recycled waste compost in their field, they will have sufficient revenue without incentives. But before that, we have to accompany them. And I take the occasion for sharing with you some conclusions that we put in a recent position paper that ECN issued, and in particular the task group that I coordinate within ECN about soil health and the need for incentives. We issued it just before the soil strategy was issued, but these conclusions can be useful for the contents of the soil health law. And we imagine some conditionalities to set up an instrument for releasing incentives to farmers that committed to apply compost and other waste-derived organic fertilizers. And we imagined even collecting some instruments already put in place by single governments. So we learned by local instruments already put in place, and the conclusions we made were like this. First of all, we must talk about quality compost, not just legal, but quality, because we have to win some dividends. The compost must be applied according to good agricultural practices. We don't have to pass the wrong message that we simply want to add carbon in soils just to store carbon and get some credits from somewhere. So compost is an instrument to, first of all, to make soils fertile. And then we imagine that member states should agree on monitoring, reporting, and verification rules and procedures that could allow soil health certificate to be issued to farmers committed to apply compost and put in place these instruments. Of course, training of farmers should accompany this path, but this is something that we have already said repeatedly during the afternoon. Long-term interventions. We think that instruments should accompany farmers over at least a 5-year-old period, because it's just after this period of continuous application according to good agricultural practices that the farmer will have in his hands healthy soil that will assure him revenues, autonomous revenues, and according to which he will have understood how important it is to preserve the quality of soils in order to preserve its incomes and the safety of his crops. I stayed only on the topic of soil health because this was the topic of this afternoon. So I didn't talk about carbon farming and credits for compost applied to soil. But just let me spend a few words on this, because if soil fertility is the main aim of applying compost to soils, an important side effect is the storage of carbon. So we want this aspect not to be forgotten, and we are a little bit concerned about the rules that are being produced in order to finance the carbon farming initiatives, in which compost is seen as a simple translocation of organic matter from one place to the other. And in particular for bio-waste derived compost, it isn't so, because we think and we are sure that compost is organic matter that has been actually recycled only after its application on soil. So it's as if it would not exist before. It wouldn't be have not been existing before. So thanks for the opportunity of sharing our views on this, and I hope that they can be of inspiration for somebody, for the Commission, for all of us.
Thank you very much for this intervention. And if I was to sum this up, it was all about raising awareness, sharing best practices, but also the need for the setup of an instrument to support farmers with tangible incentives for quality compost, stepping on good agricultural practices. And of course, inter alia, you also referred to MRV and the key role of trainings there in all these efforts. So on this note, I'd like to turn to Mr. Henk Voice once again. As I think it would be of great interest to hear from your perspective and experience. In which way do you think that consumers can help in the process of creating quality compost? And is there perhaps any best practice to share?
Yes, there's many best practices, but let me first say that if we do surveys in Europe, we see that 80% of the consumers think that compostable, biodegradable products can actually help waste collection. So this is a very high percentage, and we need to help them. We really need to help them to do the right things, to throw the waste in the right bins. And so this is not only about the Waste Framework Directive or a separate collection of organic waste. This is, okay, how can we help them? It can be very simple by developing systems where you have less bins, in the case of food waste, events where you have food waste with packaging, and you can create a closed loop. But also you see in certain countries like Austria, Spain, France, Italy, that they have introduced legislation on compostable fruit and vegetable bags. And that helps the consumer as well to do the right things, because it's a product which you can reuse at home for collecting food waste, but you can also display a message on this. You can communicate with the consumer on how to do things right. So I think the key is here to give, to learn from these examples and to give biodegradable, compostable products a place in all this legislation. And that's not only Waste Framework Directive, Packaging Waste Directive, Sustainable Products Initiatives, etc., and the fertilizer regulation. There's many, many, many things to think about. So allow me to make one other remark, hearing all the interventions from the people. And I think my pickup there is that it takes time to recover the soil. It takes years, maybe tens of years to recover the soil. So in a way, for a soil, 2050, a healthy soil, we should start today. So I fully agree with all the things that are being said, that we need to do it top-down and a very scientific, evidence-based thing. But I think in a way there is also already top-down examples in various countries which we can use and to work on both levels, because I feel the need, the urgency to start doing as soon as possible the right thing. And I think this is true, building on what Ms. Elsie Catines was saying on, let's say, the bioeconomy as well. So for us, biomaterials, research and development and investments, it's not something you do in a week or in a month or in a year. It takes years. So also there, 2050 is already today to make the decisions. So I urge also, let's say, to let the soil strategy and the bioeconomy strategy to go hand in hand, and to develop really the market and let the market, let's say, stimulate research, development and innovation and investments in this. And let me give you the example of the biorefinery in Italy, because this was a biorefinery that was in Sardinia, that was built on a site that was no longer used. And close to that site was land that was no longer used because it was degraded too much. So what happened is three things. A new biorefinery was built on the site there. They used crops to grow on degraded lands, which help to recover the land, because also crops can partly be used to restore carbon to soil. And the villages and the cities were stimulated to start separate collection of organic waste, producing compost, also adding to the land. And then they work all together. So my key takeaway there is, okay, yes, we need a top-down strategy on soil, and long-term strategy, but let's take all the individual examples in the individual countries and let them join together. And I think I've seen many experts today, so we can use consultations, very good, but I think we can start today with all the experts, probably online and here in the room. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voice, for your reply. I've been taking notes during your intervention, and you've been mentioning the need to urgently start doing the right thing, allowing for soil strategy and bioeconomy to go hand in hand. But also, as you mentioned, I would like to echo your remarks concerning the fact that as far as research and innovation are concerned, tomorrow comes today. Turning to Ms. Sabine Watt, who is joining us remotely, I would like to ask you, well, during your previous intervention, you walked us through the effects of compost and digestate on soil health. But besides this application, are there perhaps other farming practices efficient to increase soil organic carbon stocks?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, it will be a short answer, but I think it's a good. It's important to have in mind that compost application is very efficient way to increase soil organic carbon. But as Dr. Gilbert mentioned early this afternoon, it's only concerned 2% of the arable soil in Europe. So maybe a good idea would be to combine different strategies to increase soil organic matter and soil health and other farmers' practices that efficiently increase soil organic carbon. For example, the permanent cover crops, having the soil covered by plants during all the year. So this is very efficient at increasing soil organic carbon. And also agroforestry is also an interesting way and a potential interesting land occupation to increase soil organic carbon. So maybe a good way would be to use to combine this solution to increase soil organic carbon in soil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Watt. And then I would like to turn to, last but not least, once again, Mr. Arno Schwarz. As during the discussion, this has been a great focus on the now, on the present, on our vision, but also on delivery. But I think it's also equally important to look ahead. So I wanted to ask you, which role do you think that agriculture-related carbon farming practices will play with regards to soil health?
It's always difficult to speak about future, so I'll try to be cautious and also to tell you some views I may have on my own or there can exist in my environmental organization, because this topic wasn't really treated in our ESC opinion. So carbon farming can bring with it it can help some farmers to improve their practices, clearly, when we have this target of healthy soils. If these practices are based on science, nature-based solutions. In other words, when you have what Sabine Huot just told us, cover crops, when you try to as much as possible have a no-till kind of farming, when you plant hedges, when you plant trees, then you can both act on the track of carbon farming and healthy soil. But I must also say there are I may also say there can be threats because as I see in France, people already trying to develop a kind of carbon farming with labor and money for it. Are intensifying the way, for example, they are keeping their animals indoors. And there you may maybe on the one hand have carbon farming in the fields, but on the other hand, animal welfare that doesn't increase. This is not an absolute rule, but we have to look at several issues at a time. It's not easy. And this has also to do with biodiversity in our landscapes, in our soils. And it's not only a pure carbon issue that you should look as a chemist. And that's why we have a challenge to make carbon farming join the ambition for healthy soil. This is really, really important. And also to avoid that money creates a new speculative approach of practicing farming with highs and lows, and farmers may be running from one to another practice, which may not always be sustainable.
Thank you very much. And indeed, there is many challenges, but also great ambition and a plethora of opportunities that we discussed, that we addressed also via various angles covered by all speakers during this panel discussion. So I'd like to once again thank you all very much for joining us today remotely or physically in the room. I see that some speakers have also taken the opportunity to reply to some questions of the audience coming through the Q&A's box, but maybe taking into consideration time constraints, maybe very quickly I'll take one or two more questions from the audience, starting with one that might be best addressed. Well, I will open it for all speakers, so please feel free to come in. The question is, sorry, the platform, yes. Are there any studies of full climate impact of different fertilizing methods? For instance, not only carbon sequestration, but also flux of CO2, CH4, so that's methane, and nitric oxide. This is a question for all speakers, if you'd like to come in. If there's any studies of full climate impact of different fertilizing methods.
Do you want me to start? Yes, there have been quite a lot of different studies in academic journals. The difficulty is, and I'm sure Enzo will probably elaborate on this, it's defining the boundaries within which the studies are carried out and being in a position, because they often follow different methodological approaches, to make comparisons between the different studies. But boundary setting in particular is one of the big issues for us, and especially for life cycle assessments that will take into account greenhouse gas emissions. They will use in the methodology a 100-year time frame, and as Henk, I think, recently said, if we're looking to 2050, which is only 27.5 years in advance, we need to start now. So considering a 100-year timescale for actually improving soil quality and seeing all these benefits, and in particular food security, that are going to be so important now, a 100-year timeframe is, I dare say, it's not quite illogical, but it doesn't really fall within the imperative of what we need to be doing, and we need to be doing it now. And ideally, we should have done it yesterday if we're going to be certainly looking at 2030 and 2050 targets. I don't know if Enzo wants to comment further on that.
You said that perfectly. Let me just top it up with something specifically related to nitrogen, but in early stages of my commitment towards issues related to climate impact or climate benefits of using compost instead of mineral fertilizers. All the life cycle analysis we were stumbling upon, they were making hypotheses that the use of compost was adding on top of chemical fertilizers. So they were considering an increased nitrogen pool in the soil, and so a higher likeliness to produce nitrous oxide, which, as you know, is a very powerful greenhouse gas with a global warming factor of more than 300 relative to carbon dioxide. But our key argument has always been, ever since, that not only do we want to change the tools for cultivation, but we want to change the system for cultivation, keeping it sustainable, logic, and profitable. And in that respect, in the medium term and long term, organic fertilization may be fully replacing chemical fertilizers. So using only nitrogen from organic fertilizers, which is a slow release source of nitrogen, we will have less free nitrogen in the soil, which will make it much less likely to have part of that turned into nitrous oxide. So we totally have to change the vision also when we make hypotheses on life cycle analysis.
Thank you very much, Enzo, for your remarks. As I think your expertise is very much appreciated by all speakers in the room. As I noticed, the majority of us all have been nodding all throughout your reply. Maybe just one more question on, I just read through the platform. A barrier to widespread recycling of bio-waste to agricultural land is the perceived risk of contamination with plastics, metals, persistent chemicals, etc., even when using source-separated organics. What measures are proposed then to minimize this risk? This is once again an open question for speakers to come in.
Maybe I start with saying improving the quality of separate collection. So performing well done systems. I must once again recall that the legislation sets ambitious targets for limits for the content of contaminants. I again recall that the fertilizer regulation is a risk assessment based regulation. So these risks have been considered. And I can add that we have gone through several long-lasting experiences of application of waste-derived fertilizers. Of course, waste-derived fertilizer coming from separate feedstocks that were collected through separate collection systems, and no accumulation of contaminants where significant accumulation of contaminants was assessed. So the instruments we already have in place are good. So we have just to improve our commitment to perform a virtuous chain from bio-waste to soils.
Maybe I can add to that. I think there's no silver bullet for this in a way. So you need all the things that are available. So in some cases, I think it's a system. So if you have door-to-door collection of food waste, we know that the quality is much better than in systems where you have to bring it to a certain site. It's proven in many cities. Good communication helps. So especially if you say, for example, you have to put it in this bin. That leaves no room for other interpretation. And I think systems have been developed, I think 7-8 years ago already. I was in a group on standardization for communication on products. It's available, so we can use it. The tools are there. We can maybe review them and see how they can be changed. Okay, we're all open to that, but we can use them. The tools are there. And then let's say another thing is that if you are certain that you can not catch a product and people dispose it in a bin, and in a way it's with a good intention to do it, but it was in the wrong bin and it's difficult to get it out. I think there is the opportunity to change the category in a product that we are certain of that it will cause no harm. It will not create persistent microplastic in the whole process which follows. So you make it independent of, let's say, any mistakes from consumers there. Again, several tools, many tools. There's not one solution. We need to use them all, but we have developed them. So we can also we can start using them and learn from best practices and translate them to other countries if needed. So.
Thank you very much, Henk. And then maybe one last question through the Q&A box reads, how can we prevent food manufacturers from putting compostable on their consumer packaging if it's not allowed in a country to throw it away with organic waste?
Sorry, this is about, let's say, a kind of lock-in then. I think this is what we see in a way happening right now with let's say, some of the compostable materials. So I think from economic short-term perspective, being said, okay, we can't handle them in recycling, or we're not sure about, let's say, we can handle them in composting. But we have to say they're, in principle, they were designed to behave in the exact same way as organics products. Actually, that was the requirement from the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive developed in 1994. Products should be allowed if they behave in the same way. So, but okay, I appreciate that. So we should carefully look to that. But in a way, there is a kind of lock-in now. Whereas if we look from a future perspective, say 2050, and look back. So what is the situation in 2050 in terms of all the materials we use? I think also some of these materials can be recycled chemically, mechanically, or they can be composted, or they can be suitable for both pathways. So you have a preferred pathway for composting, and okay, again, if there is a mistake by a consumer, ends up in another pathway, it doesn't create harm. So I think this is a way to start developing systems also with the future in mind, and then look what we can do today and how to implement this. Because as Virginia said, we are in a transitional period. So we have to take all these, let's say, strategies into account and really think about this, how this can be done.
Thank you very much. If there is no other speaker that would like to come in with regards to this question, I'd like to then once again thank you all for your remarks addressing compost and digestate in the circular bioeconomy with us today, as it's been with great pleasure welcoming you on board. So on this note, I would like to once again thank specifically Enzo, as I say that you've been replying to many questions there in the Q&A's box. So thank you very much, because that's really helped us here with regards to time management. So then on this note, I'll just provide the floor to MEP Ms. Maria Neuchel, or well, to a video message intervention that we received from her office, as unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Ms. Neuchel was not able to join us today, but although then it's with great commitment and interest to be part of this discussion. So with the kind help of my colleague Regine, we can play the video message intervention to serve as the event's key takeaways then.
Liebe Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development. Leider kann ich bei unserem so wichtigen Seminar nicht selber teilnehmen. Ich freue mich aber, dass ich Ihnen hiermit ein paar Gedanken mit auf den Weg bringen kann. Unsere Böden haben eine unheimlich wichtige Rolle. Wenn wir in der Zukunft weiterhin Nahrungsmittel, Lebensmittel in der EU herstellen wollen. Leider ist ja der europäische und nationale Gesetzgeber nicht auf der Höhe der wissenschaftlichen Diskussion. Die Europäische Umweltagentur hat festgestellt, dass das Fehlen eines umfassenden und kohärenten politischen Rahmens, der verbindliche Ziele, Anreize und Maßnahmen zum Schutz von Land und Boden umfasst, ein wahnsinnig großes Problem darstellt und die Ziele in Sachen Bodenschutz total torpediert. In der EU gibt es aktuell keine Rechtsrahmen, keinen einzigen Rechtsrahmen und keine Anreize zur Erhöhung der organischen Bodensubstanz. Das ist ein zentrales Problem und das erste, das wir angehen müssen. Daher habe ich bereits mehrmals mit meinen Kolleginnen und Kollegen der Europäischen Kommission Sie aufgefordert, einen verbindlichen Rechtsrahmen mitsamt einer europäischen Bodenstrategie vorzulegen. Die Initiativen des europäischen Green Deals können dafür eine gute Grundlage sein. Wir müssen dafür Konsistenz und Kohärenz zwischen der Farm-to-Fork-Strategie, vorgesehenen Maßnahmen und der gemeinsamen Agrarpolitik und der Fischereipolitik, der europäischen Strategie zur Erhaltung der biologischen Vielfalt bis 2030, der EU-Forststrategie, des Aktionsplans für die Kreislaufwirtschaft, des Aktionsplans für die Bioökonomie, dem europäischen Klimarecht sowie anderen einschlägigen EU-Politiken und Strategien sicherstellen. Es geht hier um eine gute Vernetzung, um unseren Boden besser zu schützen. Im Rahmen dieser Strategie müssen Bioabfälle eine entscheidende Rolle in der Kreislaufwirtschaft spielen, um hochwertigen Kompost und Produkte auf Gärrestbasis zu erzeugen, die in nachhaltigen landwirtschaftlichen Bewirtschaftungssystemen eingesetzt werden. Ich begrüße ausdrücklich die Verpflichtung der Kommission, die Nährstoffverluste um mindestens 50% zu verringern und gleichzeitig sicherzustellen, dass die Bodenfruchtbarkeit nicht beeinträchtigt wird. Ich bin davon überzeugt, dass dies am besten durch die Schließung von Nährstoffkreisläufen, die Rückgewinnung und die Wiederverwertung von Nährstoffen und beispielsweise auch die Förderung und Belohnung des Anbaus von Leguminosen durch die Landwirte erreicht werden kann und erreicht werden muss. Dafür brauchen wir aber auch rechtsverbindliche Rechtsetzungsinitiativen sowie Maßnahmen, die die Landwirte in die Lage versetzen, das Nährstoffmanagement für sich zu verbessern. Dafür benötigen wir vor allen Dingen einen ganzheitlichen und einen zirkulären Ansatz für die Nährstoffbewirtschaftung, wie agrarökologische Praktiken, die gleichzeitig Vorteile für die Bodenqualität und für die biologische Vielfalt bringen und den Landwirt helfen können, die Abhängigkeit von zum Beispiel Mineraldünger zu beenden und die Phosphor- und Stickstoffströme zu verringern. Die Mitgliedstaaten müssen aufgefordert werden, in ihren strategischen Maßnahmen zur Förderung der effizienten Bewirtschaftung und der Kreislaufwirtschaft von Nährstoffen vorzuschlagen, sowie die Ausbildung von landwirtschaftlichen Beratern und Landwirten ganz nachdrücklich dahin zu unterstützen. Sie sehen, wir haben eine Menge vor, aber das muss passieren, denn es ist so wichtig. Wir müssen zukünftig die Aufgabe einer umfassenden europäischen Bodenstrategie in unseren Mittelpunkt stellen. Ihre Maria Neuchel von der S&D.
Thank you very much to my colleague Regine and of course to MEP Ms. Maria Neuchel in the first place, who underlined within her key takeaways the need for a binding legal framework, the key importance of the EU soil strategy, but also the key relevance of all important priorities under the European Green Deal. Ms. Neuchel also addressed the key role of biowaste in the circular bioeconomy, the need for holistic and circular approaches, but also the important role that member states play when it comes to implementation. So on this note, I would like to once again thank MEP Ms. Maria Neuchel and her team for kindly providing us with this video message intervention of the MEP that served so much to the point as the event's key takeaways today. So on behalf of the Secretariat of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I would like to once again thank all speakers, honorable MEPs that participated in this discussion today, and of course our dear audience for their active engagement when it comes to addressing this topic. And then on behalf of the Secretariat, I'm very much looking forward to continuing the discussion in the near future. So very much looking forward to that. And last but not least, once again, thanks to ECN for kindly co-organizing. Have a nice afternoon. Looking forward to continuing the debate, and until then, stay safe and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.